definitely the effect of U.S. naval vessels on the indigenous people, whether it's Liberia or Alaska, cannot be underestimated. That group moved to its new location, and other blacks from the United States joined them. They suffered attacks from local tribes. In 1824, built fortifications. You can see that's an African tradition, building walled cities for protection. In that same year, the settlement was named Liberia for liberation, with its capital at Monrovia, named for President James Monroe. Other colonization societies, sponsored by individual states, purchased land and sent settlers to areas near Liberia. Africans removed from slave ships by the U.S. Navy were also put ashore in Liberia. So, for example, after 1808, if you recall in the Constitution, Congress couldn't prohibit the slave trade, the importation of slaves, but after that, it could have been fair game. So, on the high seas, the U.S. Navy could stop slave ships on occasion, but a lot of them still got through. So the American colonization was not a sovereign state, so when Great Britain and France began to encroach in Liberian territory, they had no defense, because the United States lent diplomatic support, but of course, no military support. So in 1847, Liberia declared independence. Britain was the first nation to extend recognition. The U.S. delayed recognition until 1862 because of fears the impact might have on the issue of slavery domestically. Objections that some might have to the presence of black diplomats in Washington. Oh, we can't have those folks. Same issue happened in the 50s, but we haven't gotten to that yet with black liberation. So all this is part of what we were talking about last week about the generation of crisis. And part of the context running up to the Civil War is that even with these revolutions happening in Haiti and Cuba of slaves revolting from European powers, so Congress bans importation of slaves into the U.S. after 1808. Slave importation continues illegally throughout the Civil War, the Wanderer being one notorious slave ship. It's referred to, for example, in the movie Daughters of the Dust. People like John Brown. He was a white anti-slavery activist. He holds an anti-slavery convention in Canada, attended by 12 whites and 34 blacks. The next year, he attacks Harper's Ferry with 13 whites, 5 blacks, October 1859. Why are slaves going to Canada? Why would they be free?
They didn't support slavery.
But wouldn't there be an extradition treaty?
No.
Why?
They were controlled by people who wanted politically friends.
True. There's a hidden black history reason. Who's sitting on the throne of England? Right, this is African Americans. Queen Victoria. Who is Queen Victoria? She's the granddaughter of who? Charlotte. Now, under Queen Victoria, any slave that made it into the border of Canada, made it across the border, had the protection of the British military. And they weren't going to be handed back. And remember, we had already fought a war with Britain, so, and of course Britain was going to attack later again, after the War of 1812 to 14. So Queen Victoria, Charlotte's grandmother. So she didn't just make that rule just to piss off the Americans. So she has a curious racial history too, even though she's aware of her grandmother being black. One of the things that she said against, for example, the kingdom, well, Ethiopia, was she was offering to send missionaries to Ethiopia from the Anglican Church. And the king of Ethiopia said, well, we've been practicing Christianity longer than you have. Maybe we should be sending the missionaries to you. Vicky didn't like that. The Missouri Compromise, March 3rd, 1820. So prohibits slavery north of the southern boundary of Missouri. So, and basically the Oregon solution to that, of course, a little later was simply prohibiting all blacks as well as slavery. Nat Turner and his rebellion as a black slave and preacher led the most famous slave revolt in the United States history. In 1831, Turner and 60 to 70 other slaves revolted and killed about 60 whites in Virginia. These victims included the family of Joseph Travis, which is Turner's former owner, who was born on a plantation in Southampton County, Virginia. His parents and grandmother encouraged him to become educated and to fight slavery. The son of one of his masters taught him to read and write. Turner became known as a forceful preacher who believed that God wanted to free the slaves. This conviction led to his planning the rebellion. Now, one of the reactions to this, especially when you're starting to have these rebellions, is that Southerners begin to connect education with revolt and revolution. And there were constant revolts against slavery. So, Denmark Vesey, 1822, organized a slave revolt involving thousands of blacks in Charleston, South Carolina. It was betrayed by a house slave. 37 blacks were hanged. This basically, if you remember the Willie Lynch letter, in terms of organized opposition, when you have in these kind of bifurcations of house slaves, field slaves, who's going to be your ally, who's going to betray you. This is one of the things that gets exacerbated in terms of where do you work and where are you on the plantation and where are you going to basically stand on the question of freedom. Other revolts against slavery, about education, and Alexander Lucius Twilight, probably the first black to graduate from American College at Middlebury College in 1823. Freedom's Journal, first black newspaper, published 1827, slavery abolished in New York, July 4th of that year. From the Husia, which is basically a collection of Egyptian philosophy. Be skilled in speech so that you will succeed. The tongue of a person is a sword, and effective speech is stronger than all fighting. This is some excerpts from David Walker's appeal, and I'll post most of it on the website later. So this is an excerpt from it. I call upon the professing Christians. I call upon the philanthropists. I call the very tyrant himself to show me a page of history, either sacred or profane, on which a verse can be found which maintains that the Egyptians heaped the insupportable insult upon the children of Israel by telling them that they were not of the human family. Can the whites deny this charge? Have they not, after having reduced us to the deplorable condition of slaves under their feet, held us up as descending originally from the tribes of monkeys or orangutans? Oh my God, I appeal to every man of feeling. Is not this insupportable? Is it not heaping the most gross insult upon our miseries because they have got us under their feet, and we cannot help ourselves? Oh, pity us, we pray thee, Lord Jesus. Master, has Mr. Jefferson declared to the world that we are inferior to the whites, both in the endowments of our bodies and our minds? It is indeed surprising that a man of such great learning, combined with such excellent natural parts, should speak so of a set of men in chains. I do not know what to compare it to, unless, like putting one wild deer in an iron cage where it will be secured, and hold another by the side of the same, then let it go, and expect the one in the cage to run as fast as the one at liberty. So far, my brethren, were the Egyptians from heaping these insults upon their slaves, that Pharaoh's daughter took Moses, a son of Israel, for her own, as will appear by the following. So some references there from PBS as an example. His appeal, arguably the most radical of all anti-slavery documents, caused a great stir when it was first published in 1829 with its call for slaves to revolt against their masters. Now, he was a free black, originally from the South. They want us for their slaves and think nothing of murdering us. Therefore, if there is an attempt made by us, kill or be killed, and believe this, that it is no more harm for you to kill a man who is trying to kill you than it is for you to take a drink of water when thirsty. Even the outspoken William Lloyd Garrison, who was an abolitionist, objected to Walker's approach in an editorial about the appeal. The goal of the appeal was to instill pride in its black readers and give hope that change would someday come. It spoke out against colonization, a popular movement, of course, from what we know about from Liberia, that sought to move free blacks to a colony in Africa. America, Walker believed, belonged to all who helped build it. He went even further, saying, America is more our country than it is the whites. We have enriched it with our blood and tears. He then asked, will they drive us from our property and homes, which we have earned with our blood? Which, that would be radical. The thesis that patriotism is bought with blood and sweat, and that we're more Americans than you are, because we did more work to build America than you did. But that would be considered radical in 1829. Copies of the appeal were discovered in Savannah, Georgia, within weeks of its publication. Within several months, copies were found from Virginia to Louisiana. He revised his appeal, died of August, shortly after publishing the third edition. His objective was pretty revolutionary. He would arouse slaves in the South into rebelling against their master. His tool would be his own pamphlet, a document that was described as, for a brief and terrifying moment, the most notorious document in America. Now, he was the son of a slave owner and a free black mother. Now, the laws of the time basically said that the child, the condition of the mother, was the condition of the child. Therefore, if the mom was free, the kid was free. If father was a slave, the kid was a slave. So, a slave father and a free black mother. Born in North Carolina, Wilmington. So he, of course, even though he was free, he, of course, witnessed the horrors of slavery, including a disturbing episode of a son who was forced to whip his mother until she died. Fairly common stuff then. Walker traveled throughout the country, eventually settling in Boston, but even in that free northern city with its prevalent discrimination, life was less than ideal for its black residents, even its free black residents. He fared well in setting up a used clothing store, which he used to actually smuggle his appeal by using sailors. He began to associate with black activists in Boston. He joined institutions that denounced slavery in the South and discrimination in the North. He became involved with the nation's first African-American newspaper, the Freedom's Journal, out of New York, which he frequently contributed. By the end of 1828, he became Boston's leading spokesman against slavery. Publishing his appeal. So in order to get it out, since there's no internet then, and newspapers, of course, are not going to publish it, he relied on sailors and ship's officers sympathetic to his cause, who then transferred the pamphlet to southern ports. He often employed his usual clothing business, which, being located close to the waterfront, served sailors who bought clothing for upcoming voyages. He would sew copies of his pamphlet into the lining of sailors' clothing, and once the pamphlets reached the South, they would be distributed throughout the region. And he also sought the aid of various contacts in the South who were sympathetic to spreading the message too. Made a great impression in the South, naturally, with both slaves and slaveholders. To the slaves, the words were inspiring and instilled a sense of pride and hope. Whites were horrified, on the other hand, initiated laws that forbade blacks to learn to read and banned the distribution of anti-slavery literature. They offered a $3,000 reward for Walker's head and $10,000 to anyone who could bring him to the South alive, I guess for torture or whatever. Friends, concerned with his safety, implored him to flee to Canada. He responded that he would stand his ground. Somebody must die in this cause. I may be doomed to the stake in the fire or the scaffold tree, but it is not in me to falter if I can promote the work of emancipation. A devout Christian, he believed that abolition was a glorious and heavenly cause. He published a third edition, and 2 months after that, he was found dead in his home, though there was probably no evidence supporting the allegation. A lot of people believe he'd been poisoned, and with the forensics of the time, how could you tell? Later scholarship suggested he died of TB, which is the same disease that killed his daughter. Certainly better that being this story than him being poisoned, though certainly a lot of people wanted him dead. So Walker's appeal was one of revolt against slavery. Others basically choose individual paths of excellence. Macon B. Allen, the first black lawyer, admitted to the bar again in Massachusetts. Frederick Douglass publishes the first of his narratives and publishes his own newspaper, the North Star, in 1847. Black woman Sarah Roberts was barred from a white school in Boston. Her father files the first school integration suit. So one of the examples, well, this is an indicator of what's going on. There's a significant free black population in the North, but they still experience discrimination. 1850, the Massachusetts Supreme Court rejects Charles Sumner's argument for school integration and establishes separate but equal precedent. Sumner is on the list. I have a list of, he's in my top 5 favorite Republicans. This is Sumner and Stevens. Thaddeus Stevens are, they were referred to as the radical Republicans. And basically what made them, this is the first use of the term radical in American politics. So what was radical about them? They were white men that basically were against white supremacy and basically sought to eliminate it at any cost. Well, not violence, but any legal means necessary. So Sumner argued for school integration. Now, this becomes a challenge for the rest of America, even a century or so later, because one of the pieces that happens with one of the first public schools, for example, in New York, is that the African Free School is established to educate free black children, but it isn't exclusively black, because the blacks established the first public school, because otherwise there's private schools. They establish a public school, but they don't exclude whites from coming to it. But white schools did exclude black kids, as exemplified by this. At the federal level, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed by Congress. 1850, this essentially meant that it was illegal to harbor a runaway slave. There were penalties, and required that you give the slaves back to their masters and transport them. Boston abolitionists invade a Boston courtroom to rescue a fugitive slave. They dispersed the slave catchers in Pennsylvania, Syracuse. Martin Delany publishes The Condition, Elevation, Emigration, and Destiny of the Colored People of the United States, which you can find this on in Google Docs. It's a fascinating read. One of the things, I don't know, I didn't see any of you at the U of O this weekend, but Amiri Baraka, one of the founding poets in the Black Arts Movement, did a talk. And one of the things he suggested in terms of college students of any race, study the best. Study the best writers, the best artists, the best poets, the best musicians, the best orators, and emulate them and develop your own style. So when you read, I'm going to post David Walker's appeal, and I'm going to post, I think I have a copy of Delany's Condition and Elevation. Well, you can find Delany's writings. He was one of the first black officers in the Army. So the Condition, Elevation, Immigration, and Destiny of the Colored People of the United States. So he was actually pro emigrating to Africa, and actually did make trips to Africa, but also fought in the Civil War too. Harry Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, the interesting thing about being called an Uncle Tom is that if you read the book, Uncle Tom is the person that's actually helping slaves escape. It's the two black henchmen of the overseer Simon Legree that beats Uncle Tom to death. So Uncle Tom, there was an adaptation of, as they would call it, a New Jack adaptation of Uncle Tom's Cabin called I Ain't Your Uncle by the San Francisco Mime Troupe. And basically one of the things they talked about is that since Uncle Tom was actually working to free slaves, he simply adopted a non-aggressive posture to whites to be able to achieve that goal. And that became disparaging for people who, outwardly did not resist whites, militantly. So one of the things in terms of looking at every war that the United States ever participated in, black people, and following David Walker's appeal, and the logic is this: black people have fought in every war that the United States has ever fought, even before there was a United States. So the idea is we've earned our citizenship, even more than European immigrants. We fought for this country. In 1775, blacks were excluded from the Continental Army by George Washington till he started losing. Generals decided to bar slaves and free blacks from Continental Army, and Congress approves on October 8th and 23. So what happens then? A British lord offers freedom to any black who will fight for the British. Divide and conquer. Washington himself, even after that, issues orders to forbid blacks in the army. And then he reverses himself and authorized recruitment of free blacks New Year's Eve. So people are willing to fight for the country, but we get dissed, and we join and win. So with the Revolutionary War, as with the Revolutionary War, blacks volunteered in numbers to fight for the Union forces. The Hannibal Guards of Pittsburgh, the Crispus Attucks Guards of Albany, and similar groups in Philadelphia, New York, Boston, organized to recruit black volunteers for the Civil War. So note the historical references. Hannibal guards and the Crispus Attucks guards. If this appears on the final in your future, don't be surprised. So, as with the Revolutionary War, the president, Lincoln and company, first refused black volunteers joining up. So, before and after the war, so when I said, Obama liking Lincoln, I'm just like, really? Are you serious? So, before and after the war, met with a group of black leaders, including Frederick Douglass. He was the first president of the United States to actually meet with African American leaders. But his suggestion was that rather than fight the Civil War, he suggested that all blacks move to Costa Rica to forestall the Civil War. So this is before war breaks out. So he's calling Frederick Douglass and all these folks to the White House, and here's the solution to keep the country together. Y'all go to Costa Rica. And, well, with David Walker's appeal and Frederick Douglass and all these folks, no, we ain't going. This is our country. End slavery. And so that was the piece that, in terms of the radical Republicans, Sumner and Stevens, their solution before the war and during the war and after the war, this is what made them radical. Free the slaves immediately. End slavery. Give the slaves education. Give them 40 acres and a mule. That is the means to work. Give them the vote. Make them American citizens in every way, shape, or form. Now. Because, boom, make easily 4 million blacks citizens. That would swell the Republican voting rolls. Okay, radical. So that was radical. Eliminating white supremacy. And there were two white people saying that, as well as Frederick Douglass, which was Republicans. Right? So this is when the Republicans were cool. Some people may think they're cool now, but these Republicans saying, look, and make them citizens, full citizens. Lincoln, in that framework, is a moderate. He's not radical. Y'all go to Costa Rica, which, hey, Costa Rica's got great surfing, but I don't think so. Nathan Bedford Forrest. Forrest Gump's namesakes founds the Ku Klux Klan after the Civil War, but as a commanding officer in the Civil War, he oversaw the massacre at Fort Pillow, Tennessee. At Fort Pillow, a force of black soldiers and civilians, black women and children and soldiers were burned and buried alive after they surrendered. Think of it kind of as a mass lynching carried out on American soil by armed force in time of war. Let's see. Some other responses to slavery within, just before the Civil War. There's a question about the term uppity. Uppity means you didn't know your place if you were black. You attempted to educate yourself and consider yourself equal, and any attempt to act as an equal got you the label uppity and could get you killed. So the plan with Gabriel Prosser was not just to free themselves, but free all slaves in Virginia and make Virginia a black homeland for all those people unfit for slavery. Attempted to incite a revolt of all slaves of Virginia, captured an arsenal in Richmond, and then led a revolt against the city and then create a free state. A storm washed out all access to the city, delaying the attack, and the conspiracy was betrayed. So we've seen where Virginia becomes kind of like the model for the creation of whiteness and the corresponding disempowerment of people of color as well as women. So we'll